Hi, welcome to the Optimising Your Brilliance podcast, where we get to the source of what makes people brilliant and explore how to eradicate the barriers that stop you from shining. By shining, I mean being at your absolute best in both work and life. You'll hear from business and thought leaders who bear all and share their insider secrets, along with my episodes focused on optimising your performance, productivity, success and well-being. My name is Estelle Reid, founder of Be, executive coach, speaker and best-selling author of Inner Brilliance, Outer Shine, 10 Antidotes to Imposter Syndrome, Workaholism and Stress. So if you're ready to take your work life to the next level, let's begin. Welcome to today's episode. If you're looking for inspiration, practical wisdom, and a candid look at what it takes to build a meaningful career, you're in the right place. I'm joined by Andrew Whitehead, partner, head of energy and utilities at Shakespeare Martineau LLP, and member of Amper Holdings LLP. His journey is filled with lessons, having been the senior partner at Shakespeare's for many years. So here's why you'll want to listen all the way through. Firstly, discover the power of serendipity, hear how unexpected opportunities and chance encounters shaped Andrew's career, and learn how you can recognise and embrace these moments in your own life. Then, overcoming fear and embracing challenge, Andrew opens up about the moments that pushed him out of his comfort zone and shares strategies for facing your own fears, whether it's stepping up for a leadership role or performing in front of an audience. The value of being different. We explore why standing out rather than fitting in can be your greatest asset and how authenticity can set you apart in any industry. Then, resilience through adversity. Andrew reflects on personal and professional challenges, including a major health scare, and reveals how these experiences can make you refocus on what truly matters. And then finally, actionable advice for growth. From building strong teams to finding renewed purpose, Andrew shares practical tips and thought-provoking questions that will help you grow, adapt and thrive no matter where you are in your journey. Tune in for a conversation packed with insights, encouragement and real-world advice. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take the next step, this episode will leave you motivated to embrace new challenges and be unapologetically yourself. So, welcome everybody. I have got Andrew Whitehead here with me today from Shakespeare Martineau. Thank you so much for coming on.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
And I was just saying earlier that it means so much that he's here, especially when I think about where you are in your career and how far you've travelled and how people listening out there will really benefit from this conversation to understand your journey, how you've got to where you've got to, so that, because again, when I put myself in my younger day shoes, there's nothing more I would have appreciated than hearing from an experienced HR manager, chief people officer, experienced coach, etc., to understand what their journey was and how they got to where they got to. So the first question we always start with is, what's your origin story? So what is it that makes you, you?
Right. Well, that's a really hard one for me to answer. I'll give it a go. So I was brought up in East Yorkshire and had a very stable, happy family upbringing. I think going through all the usual level to not knowing what on earth I wanted to do. And I didn't end up with fantastic, especially good school back in those days. I think it's a lot better now, but they were reasonable enough. And the career advice was, well, you could do law. Why not do law? Because that's a currency. You can probably do all sorts of other things. You don't have to think about what your career is going to be straight now. So I went up and applied for a law degree. And I think I only got one offer. Leaving East Yorkshire, going down to Birmingham, spent 2 years there doing my law degree. And then after the sort of first year, I think what you have to do is, if you want to possibly be a solicitor, you've got to start applying for law college. So again, not necessarily wanting to be a solicitor, but wanting to make sure that I had the options covered. I ended up doing that. And it just feels a little bit like being on a conveyor belt, because I was applying for my training contract, which was called article back in those days. And I took the first job offer I got, which was a firm in Birmingham, because I had to pay my overdraft off. Next thing you know, 2 years later, I'd qualified as a solicitor into our M&A team, which was actually the only job on offer. So when I reflect back on that, I ended up being a newly qualified solicitor doing M&A work in a law firm in Birmingham without having had any plans to do any of that, really. I just sort of ended up falling into that by virtue of, I think, as I said, getting on that conveyor belt and not making a conscious decision to get off it. I did enjoy the work, and I think the pivotal moment in the rest of my career was a few years later, when one of the big utilities was actually relocating out of London to the Midlands, and we wanted a junior lawyer to do a short-term 6 months secondment with them. So I was sort of plucked out of the M&A team and said, you can go and do that, can't you? And so I did. And then I ended up becoming an energy lawyer, which back in the early 90s, that was actually quite unusual for lawyers outside of London. I mean, there's loads of energy lawyers. But back in the early 90s, it was quite unusual. And I sort of stayed in that area of law the rest of my career, basically. And I'm still working for the same client now. So again, that wasn't a conscious decision to specialize in a particular area. That was again, I guess it was serendipity, the fact that, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, you might quite like this, why don't you do that? And it became my career. So now I wasn't just a solicitor, I was an energy solicitor, so I'd come and got myself a little bit niche. And then I ended up becoming a partner in 1994. And again, I think that was fortuitous in a sense, because the law firm I'd chosen hadn't done any big mega mergers. And there's a lot of mergers going on at that point in time. And it sort of was a little bit easier to make marketing, because you were obviously playing in a little bit of a smaller pool. And I was promoted to partner relatively early on, wind forward to, and there was an opportunity to go forward to get elected to be the firm's senior partner, which was probably the first time I actually decided to do something and make a brave decision, basically, to put yourself up for election, because it is a tough thing to do, isn't it? Because you're facing potential rejection by all of your peers. Anyway, fortunately, I was elected, carried on with my energy lawyer day job, but now had this role, which gave me a job chairing our governance board and a pastoral role with all of our other partners. And then we had the next big thing in my career, at least, which was the merger of that firm, which was when I joined Martineau, became at that point, they merged with a firm called Shakespeare, and we became Shakespeare Martineau. And before I knew it, we were into 2018, and I was involved in looking for and interviewing and appointing a new CEO. We hired our CEO, Sarah Walker-Smith, in 2018, I think, and she joined in early 2019. And little did I know that she had quite a track record in writing, directing, and performing a musical, which I hadn't a clue about at the time. So again, I would say that was serendipity, because we were just talking about music and interest one day, and I think it was in COVID actually, and we decided it would be quite nice to sing a little song for people to keep them cheerful in one of the lower moments of lockdown. And that took us through to 2021.
I remember you doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is really, you and I didn't know each other at that point, but I was like, wow, this is really different and uplifting. Because like for me, that you were saying earlier about putting yourself up for a senior partner, that it was, you're at risk of potential rejection. Like for me, doing what you guys did to your team, that would really scare me. So what was the thought behind that?
Well, risk of potential ridicule, obviously, and embarrassment, but we were in lockdown, basically, and no one was seeing each other and meeting each other, obviously. Everything was on a screen, wasn't it? So we just thought it might be quite a nice way to try and connect in some way. So it was me playing, I think we were doing On My Own from Les Miserables or something, which again felt a little bit appropriate. But I was playing that in my house in Warwick, and Sarah was playing the recording in her shed and videoing herself singing to it. And then we were sort of mixing it together. It wasn't particularly professional, and I certainly didn't have the microphones and all that sort of recording stuff, but it didn't seem to matter really. It was just the effort and trying to put something together to say, we can beat this and we're not on our own. And we took the brave decision of sort of sharing it with the rest of the business. And I don't know whether people were just being kind or not, but it seemed to land well. But it could have gone one or two ways, couldn't it?
Well, of course, I've heard it did land really well and something really unique and different. So connect the dots for people with music and you.
Okay, so if I go all the way back to school again, but not secondary school, but primary school. So I would have been about 9 or 10, I think, and I would be playing the piano. And I was been aged since I could sit upright on a stool, I think. And I had relatives who had a grandfather who used to have his own dance band up in Carlisle, actually, and probably not very far from you. But music is in the family a little bit. Anyway, I think I must have been quite good at it. And by the time I was at primary school, I was playing hymns in assembly and things like that. I can remember one time when I was put up in front of assembly, in front of all the children, to play Scott Joplin's Entertainer. I think that's what it was. I remember being mainly terrified, but also a little bit pleased that I could do something that people seemed to think was good or impressive, but mainly terrified. And then I think it was the year later, we did one of these primary school productions, and I think it was of Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. I ended up playing the piano through that as well. So then I had this reputation of being the pianist, and that sort of, I took that with me into secondary school, where I ended up being the hymn player in assembly again, which is one thing when you're 9 or 10, but when you're trying to be a bit cool, it's not such a great thing, isn't it, after all? So I had this sort of love-hate relationship with the piano and having this supposed talent to be able to play the piano. But of course, when I went off to university, it sort of stopped. And it took a few years before I could actually afford to buy a piano and actually start playing again. But I've always had it as one of my interests. And I also used to play in an orchestra. And when I was off to university, I bought a guitar and started playing guitar and things as well. So music has always been an important part of my life, but it never intersected with the work at all. They were completely different until this chance moment when Sarah and I were just happy to mention we shared an interest and we tried to do something together. So that's where it sort of came together.
Wow. And so already we've got a theme, which is you're brave, in that, it was a brave move applying to be senior partner because there was a risk of potential rejection. And also you said you were mainly terrified playing the piano. So I love brave people, by the way. So how do you overcome those things that you were terrified of?
Yeah, well, I suppose my primary thing is to go back into prep and double prep and just make sure I'm as prepared as I possibly can be. When it comes to playing the piano, there's no way I'd get up there and put that in front of people without knowing I could do it to the best of my ability by making sure I've been practicing and rehearsing, etc. I don't sort of fly by the seat of my pants and never have done. But I can't genuinely remember about the thought process now about standing for election, but I'm sure I would have thought about it, thought about the job specification, thought about where it played to my strength and where I had weaknesses. I would have thought about what those weaknesses were and tried to work on them and just approached it very, very methodically. I think that's the way I try and overcome nervousness or fear about failure by saying, well, I've only got myself to blame if I hadn't practiced or put myself in the best position, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah. And how much of that is, because I know you were talking about, well, there's been a lot of serendipitous moments and, these opportunities to be promoted and, to get your energy client, which was quite unique, wasn't it, back then, back in the day? So what do you think the contributing factors were to you being presented with those opportunities? What was it that other people saw in you?
I suppose you have to be perceived as someone who is up for a challenge and is prepared to push themselves out their comfort zone a little bit. And I've always been, what's the right word? Well, I've always struggled with the idea that I'm in a rut and that I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I might be doing it really well, but I'm not challenging myself. And I think that maybe comes across in wanting to go down rabbit holes, wanting to try new things. And certainly the idea about getting elected and doing this new role would took me out of my feeling role into something else. And I was quite interested in that to see whether I could do that and whether I'd find it interesting. And maybe the music thing is similar to that, isn't it? I wonder if I could play the guitar. Or I'm not going to know unless I buy a guitar and try it. And I wonder if I just came back to the musical collaboration. I've never composed a piece of music in my life, but we've ended up composing over maybe 120 songs now, over 5 years, which is a lot, isn't it? But I'd never done that in my life. So I don't know whether any of this is any good or not, but the point is you don't know until you try, do you? And you could spend all your life regretting something. And I always think you never know whether that opportunity is going to come again. It might be the last chance you get. So if someone says, would you like to take 6 months out of your day job to go and do this secondment with this new client? My natural inclination would always be to say yes. I'll go for it.
So what do you get from... So, for example, tomorrow I'm going wild water swimming with a previous podcast guest, funnily enough.
In the summer, you have to go wild water.
That's what it is. And yeah, as soon as she said it, the thing is with me, if someone lays down the gauntlet, I'll just go, yeah, okay then. Yeah, I'll give that a go. But I'll be honest, I'm nervous about it because it's really frosty up here. I don't know what it's like in the Midlands. I saw her on Wednesday and I said, hey, are we still going, even though it's frosty? Yeah, it'll be fine. As long as it's not raining. So we were supposed to go the other week, but we've had a lot of floods up here. Apparently it's not good to swim in a flooded lake. I know what I get out of pushing myself out of the comfort zone and doing things that I get apprehensive about. What do you get out of challenging yourself?
It's proving to yourself that you can achieve something, isn't it? And challenges are there to be overcome, aren't they? Otherwise, I always think life's a bit boring. And maybe I've got a very low boredom threshold. I don't know, but I do need to be challenged. And I can only do the same thing over and over again for so long before I want to do something different. So I think it's that feeling of moving yourself forward. Again, my other big fear is, as I said earlier, getting stuck in a rut, basically, and not being able to move forward. And if you're not self-improving or doing something different, or I just think, again, it's a bit of a wasted life, isn't it? Aren't we here to experience new things and try things out and work out what we can do really well and maybe things we can't do so well? I know, for example, I am hopeless at sport. I was rubbish at school and I've never really tried to do anything since then, but it's not been my thing. And maybe it's true that you either go into music or you go into sport. I mean, I think there was obviously lots of examples of people doing both. For me, the extracurricular stuff was always the music things and definitely not sport. And I quite like that, Matt, because if you're in a career like law, there's a lot of talk about rugby and a lot of talk about cricket and that sort of thing. There's not much talk about damaging the latest musical. People don't have those sorts of conversations, do they? But I like to be a little bit different. And it gives me that feeling that, I've got my own thing. And you don't have to be interested in rugby or be good at cricket or go to the football match every fortnight or whatever.
I love the fact that you like to be different. And because we can spend so much time trying not to be, and particularly growing up, I've heard many stories about, whether it was wearing the same shoes as your friends or not having two parents at home or not achieving the same academic achievements. And hence why we end up with things like imposter syndrome because we don't belong. But I also really like to be different and I'm really rebellious and I won't follow what I should do. I like to do things my own way. So I get that entirely, but I've had to work on that and being comfortable at being different. How have you got to a place where you're comfortable with being different?
It's quite difficult in a legal career because you are sort of encouraged. I mean, it's not quite the same now, is it? But certainly when I was in my career, I mean, the lawyers typically came from the same sort, not always, but there was a lot of public school and privilege. It's definitely different now. But when I'm talking about when I was entering the profession, and I do feel different because I came from a secondary modern comprehensive school. I went to the university. There were lots of public school people there. And I come from a school where I perceived that I was one of the more academic students, to suddenly getting put into a very big pool of people who were all high performers in lots of different backgrounds, but particularly people wanting to have that legal career, and they maybe had a father who was a judge or whatever it happened to be. You know, you had to stand out. And I quite like the fact that I wasn't of that mold. I think it's different now because I think that there's much more access into the profession than the way it used to be. The other thing is that if you're not careful, lawyers can come across as very identikit. And again, I think clients are looking for lawyers or advisors that they like and that they trust, but that's something different and memorable about it. So, you know, if you're a great sportsman or you're a great musician or you've got some other interests, you know, I would say shout about it and just be that person that's got something interesting about them, because otherwise we're all giving the same sort of advice in the same sort of way, aren't we? Using the same sort of technology and tool, and you've got to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, great words of advice. So, like for me, listening to you, it's really obvious why you are as successful as you are. When I listen, you know, there's a lot of growth mindset stuff in there. How do you think we sabotage our success?
Well, I would say, again, just rooting the answer in my own business. So we've got 3,540 members in our LLP. There's a lot of people in the business. We have to operate as a team, collaborate with each other, and mentor and make sure that we've got a talent pipeline coming through, etc. Now, where I can see that occasionally you can sabotage yourself is where you operate in a silo or you put self-interest before the wider good. It's very easy to do that, isn't it? Because often remuneration is linked to that. People are encouraged to shout about their successes and not hide them under a bushel. But at the end of the day, you've got to find a way in which you can help one another rather than player and furrow, basically, because unless you're operating as a sole practitioner or you're an entrepreneur running your own business on your own, you know, you are in a team environment. I think true success comes when you put self-interest to one side, or you can work both together, but actually you're generating success for the collective. And I think where I've seen people fail, it's because they have put themselves first.
And
It's not giving up on your own self-interest, but you've got to always give priority, I think, to the wider good and success of the organization rather than your own self-interest.
and what's your view on how you create that point of focus so that you are focused on the success for the collective? Is it collaborating over a vision, a mission, the values, your strategic plan?
Well, you've definitely got to feel that, for me, it's about being in a purpose-led organization. So you've got to feel that there's a point to it all. That it's all very well sacrificing self-interest to the business, but you've got to then want that business to succeed and genuinely believe in where it's going. Otherwise, you're not genuinely engaged in its success, are you? So I think you could find that emotional engagement. So I would say somewhere that has a purpose. I think it helps to like people as well. So for me, I want to see everyone succeed around me because I feel like I'm surrounded by like-minded people that I genuinely want to be successful. I'd be lying if I said I absolutely adore all 100 or 135 of our members, because that wouldn't be true. But generally, the vast majority are like-minded individuals, and you know, I want them all to succeed. And I think liking each other, enjoying each other's company, having mutual respect is really important. I think also that's why I've ended up in a firm that isn't one of the sort of mega firms where you just wanted thousands and thousands. Although we're a top 50 law firm, we're still relatively small enough to know everyone and to feel, what's the right word? You don't have to know everyone's life story, do you? And go on holiday with them or anything, but to feel that you know them enough to like and respect them rather than just be names on a piece of paper. That's still important.
Yeah, we were having a debate yesterday, funnily enough, in Carlisle. It was a fantastic organisation, and it was about organisational culture. I was with all my HR professionals, and they were talking about their culture change. And I was intrigued by how people belong in their organisation when they connect with the values. I've always been fascinated with that kind of work, but also that transition that we can make, particularly if we're trying to change our organisation. I remember 20 years ago when I was gainfully employed in the legal services industry, we literally hired a bus. So we hired a physical bus to take the partnership to a presentation. And we said, you're either on the bus or you're not, but this is the future of the business. And actually, some people chose not to get on the bus because they didn't like the direction of travel. They couldn't align with what it was that we were doing.
That's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, that's just being open and honest and saying this isn't the best for me.
Exactly. And this was also what came out of this other organisation. They were saying that actually when we don't feel like we are with like-minded people, then people choose to leave the business. It's almost like a natural selection process, isn't it?
And I think it is a good measure of the values of an organisation if it can be open and honest. There's sorts of instances where the bus isn't for everyone because it won't be. And you've got to treat people with respect and of integrity and make it an easy transition for people to move out in the same way people move in. And we've tried to do that over the years. And I think we've been reasonably successful about that.
Yeah. And especially if your evidence is that you like the people you work with, the like-minded people. So now changing gears a little, just focusing on some, I've got a flavour of what's made you a success, but also how do you overcome challenges? So we were talking earlier about you've had a health challenge. Do you want to talk to us about that?
So I had an operation back in January to get an ulcer removed from my tongue because it turned out to be cancerous. And I've always managed to avoid any sort of major health scare through my life, really. So obviously assumed I was Superman and I'd last forever. I think you get to a particular age. I think one of my partners very kindly said that it was sniper value when you get to 55 and you've got to get through to 60 or something like that. I had a bit of a health scare. The operation went fine. I've not had any treatment since then, but I mean, it definitely reset my perspective on life generally, but also work. And so my role, because I talked about being elected a senior partner. Well, elections are not forever unless you're Vladimir Putin or potentially Trump. So they do come to an end, don't they? My term, it came to an end last year. So it was for me about finding a renewed purpose in the business because that had defined my role for such a long time, for about 12 years. I'd always kept the energy lawyer day job and I still got that now, but it was that other aspect of getting involved in bits of management and governance. That was always going to be a difficult issue for me to navigate on. I always knew it was going to be. But having healthcare just puts everything in perspective, doesn't it? And all the things that were, I won't say bothering me, but my list of things to have to resolve, when I sort of mentally look back on them, I'm thinking, well, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important. And maybe there was one or two that I could then focus on, but it definitely helped sort of declutter my brain a little bit. I mean, obviously, I don't recommend people going through health scares, but it happens. It can be useful. Maybe there's always a silver lining, isn't there? So you say, well, actually, that was a horrible thing to do. But what it has done is enable me to look forward now with a slightly different lens to say, actually, I can more clearly work out now stuff that's just a distraction that I really shouldn't be spending a lot of energy on. And maybe just focusing on the things where, I can usefully spend my time worrying and overcoming challenges. So to that extent, I mean, that's what I've been doing in the last 7 or 8 months. It's just trying to be a bit more refocused. And obviously it makes you realize that we've been talking about work, but I mean, work's just a part of your life, isn't it? It can't be all your life. I've got a wife and a daughter, and I've got, wider family, and, it does make you realize what's more important in life.
A previous guest, also from the legal industry, he used a really good metaphor, and he said, it's just like Mars bar. He said, you have to work, rest and play. We're old enough to remember that advert.
Yeah, I remember.
We have to think about all those different aspects. So what would be your pearls of wisdom for people that are facing a challenge? What's helpful for you?
I think to try and, I had to raise myself from being quite gloomy about the situation I found myself in. Firstly, to remind myself that I've actually been very privileged and fortunate in my life, not just health-wise, but in my career. And I talked about serendipity and those things that happened to me that got me where I got to. So, I mean, that people can have bad experiences in life, but I've had some good ones. So first of all, it makes you feel grateful for what you've got and what you've had.
So how do you overcome challenges? What would you recommend others do?
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing would be just stepping back really and trying to lift myself out of that gloom. And maybe, I don't want to use the word self-pity, but it was definitely feeling very self-focused on my own predicament, to actually raise myself and say, well, there's always a silver lining, isn't there? There's always a positive side to things. So, like I said earlier, the positive side for me was, this is now giving me a renewed focus and will help me find that purpose I was struggling with, because there's so many other things going on in my work life. I've now got focus. So that was definitely a positive. And then I think it just makes you not take things for granted. And that's got to be really important. I mean, you never know what's going to hit you around the corner. I think I always assumed, as I said earlier, that I would live forever and that things would carry on just landing nicely for me. And, at some point, that's not going to be the case. And so hopefully that made me a better person, more balanced in my life, I suppose, is one way of looking at it. If it happens again, I'll start thinking, hang on a minute, it's gone the wrong direction. But, and I think it gives you some perspective as well, doesn't it? Because everyone's got their challenges. Very few people have it easy. And if it looks like they're having it easy, they're probably not, because everyone's got their own demons that they're battling with. There's just probably going to be different demons. So having my own to battle with, I think has also helped me, emphasize and maybe just see behind some of the stuff that sometimes you look at to think, well, there's someone probably having a difficult time over there, and maybe things aren't as obvious or straightforward as they might seem.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I had cancer. It was removed. It was fine. But I remember that moment. I was walking around the hospital and I thought, blimey, to put this into perspective, this is nothing. Because the people I'm walking past right now look really poorly. And they've not been able to have a couple of procedures and be in and out and go. And there was also a hurricane where people, they'd lost their homes. And it is interesting how those things can put things into perspective, those moments.
Yeah, totally.
So, right, what the previous guest does is leave a question for the future guest. And I'm going to get you to...
You didn't warn me about that.
I know.
Oh, right. No.
So...
That unpacked it through.
This is actually from Dan Jarvis. Dan Jarvis, if you're listening. So he wanted to ask the next guest, what's one thing you would tell your past self? So what would you tell younger you back then?
So I would say to my younger me, don't wait until you're 55 before you start trying to compose some music. Because actually I've just wasted 30 years there of stuff that I think I can do reasonably well. So I would say back to pushing yourself and getting out of your comfort zone. That was definitely out of my comfort zone, but I needed someone to push me, maybe go out and explore those areas without waiting for that moment to arrive. Otherwise you're wasting time. I think it's maybe about not getting overly anxious about fitting in, because I think, again, it's becoming much different to the profession when I started, but I think it's far less important now to look and sound and feel like the lawyer that everyone assumes you are. I think not just in the way you behave, but the sort of advice you give as well. I think people are looking for business advisors that they like and they trust. They're not necessarily looking for a lawyer in a suit. And these days with hybrid working and AI, dare I mention that, and all the other things going on, everything's changing. You just got to be prepared to change. And I would say there isn't probably an identical lawyer anymore, and there isn't a standard you need to compare yourself against. Just be yourself. Well, obviously, you're going into a profession where you have to act with integrity and you have to know your stuff, etc. But that's the basics, isn't it? So then how do you apply that? How do you go about building relationships with colleagues and clients? Maybe when I was starting out, I probably looked at the people around me who were probably all men, probably all white males in their 40s and 50s that would be in the pub. Those were my role models back then. And those are the people I would be thinking, I must behave like that. I must look like that. I think people coming into the profession now have got all sorts of role models, hopefully, that they can aspire to and look for. So, yeah.
It has, yeah. There's so much in there. And that thing about being yourself. How long do you think it takes us to get to a point where we are ourselves? Do you think that is age-related, personal development related?
Well, I don't know what being yourself means, because I think I'm a different person. So maybe you're always changing, aren't you? I don't think you get to an age or a point in your life where you're suddenly being yourself and then you're in a steady state. For me, given all the life experiences I've had, including recently, I think I'm a different person to the person I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You're still influenced, informed by what happens in your past, aren't you, clearly? But, if I pack my job in tomorrow and go and do something completely different, I'll be a slightly different person with different experiences and different challenges to overcome. And I'll find new ways of overcoming them that I haven't found today. So, yeah, I don't think there's a point where you find yourself, but you just got to be authentic to yourself at any point in time, haven't you? Rather than try and mold yourself into something you're not.
Takes a lot of time, energy.
Found out as well, don't you? Pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yes. And in fact, that going back to the organisation I was with on yesterday, they were saying exactly that. The key has been honesty and authenticity. That's what's really helped grow their business.
Yeah.
So what question would you like to leave for the next guest?
If I hadn't put myself forward for election, if I hadn't done that, I might have spared myself quite a lot of stress and angst over the years, because it's not good plain sailing. Because nothing ever is it? And I'd have ended up with a quite different career. So, if I framed it in a different way, maybe that was a sliding doors moment for me. Maybe there's other things where, maybe if I'd not decided not, I was either going to do law or I was going to do some engineering-y type degree. I might have chosen a completely different career. No question then. What decision did you take which proved to be pivotal that maybe you regret?
So thank you so much for sharing your pills of wisdom. There's been so much. And as I said, my intention with this, I put myself in younger lawyers' shoes and thought about what would they want to know from you? What would they want to learn? How could we unpack what it is that makes you successful? And what I've learned is that you're always up for a challenge. You're always pushing your comfort zone. You're always acting and changing yourself. I love the fact that you said, we're just different people. I love the fact that you are saying people should be themselves and it's okay to be different, which I think will really resonate with the generations that are coming through. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you being here.
If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estellereed.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Reed, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimising Your Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.